Brothers and sisters, good morning. Today, Pastor Joshua will be leading us to study the book of Judges, chapter 16. Recording about Samson. He is the last judge in the book of Judges. He's Samson. The topic for this chapter is believe that God will surely save. Believe that God will ultimately save, even though in difficulties. And Samson is such a bad leader. For this chapter, we could see that Samson died. In fact, the last chapter is like an ending. Chapter 15. In the times of the Philistines, Samson was made a judge for 20 years. So he was a judge in between the time when the Philistines oppressed the Israelites. Has the Israelites come out from the hand of the Philistines? No. Over those 40 years, then Samson was a judge for 20 years. He's really not a right or not a good judge. He has a lot of weaknesses and shortfalls. But the only good thing is he has strength. All things are not good, but he has strength and power. To the people in Rehoboam and Jeroboam's era, this is important. It's very important when we have to make a choice. So this is how the book of Judges recorded the incidents. So they have recorded this history so everyone will know. For someone who only has strength, but all things are bad, what is it like with such a king or a judge? What will it be? What about the will of God? As the people, as the priests and the Levites, how should they choose? How does it remind us today? The topic that I've just given you is the conclusion of the 4 chapters. Believe that God will ultimately save. Let's look at chapter 16 now. In chapter 15, I just mentioned that he's been a judge for 20 years. But the Israelites has not come out from the hands of the Philistines. When Samson was a judge, there is no peace in the whole of Israel. There's no peace at all, unlike other judges. He has not brought about peace. It's only by his strength he just rushed back and forth in Israel. What is the biggest weakness of Samson? What is his problem? So we would talk about it in the previous chapters. Back to chapter 14. He went down to Timnah and saw a young Philistine woman. Then he loved her, has to marry her. So eventually in that incident, and then he's being forced by the Philistine woman in Timnah, and he told people about the riddle. So in Samson's marriage, eventually becomes miserable to him. But God has his heart. He has his weakness, but God has his will. So people's weakness cannot hinder God's will to be accomplished, but has limited the will of God to be accomplished. Now we come to we talked about chapter 15 yesterday. Talk about Samson's kung fu. So how was he like as a judge? What has he done? What has he accomplished? He burned down the fields of the Philistines and killed many of the people. And even used donkeys' jawbone to kill, well, a lot of people there. This is about his strength. When he fought against the Philistines, and he even tear apart the people. He just freely took the donkey's jawbone and killed 1,000 men. Now we could see God's wonderful salvation. Samson is about to die, almost dying of thirst. Then he prayed and God gave him a miracle. Then he continued to be a judge for 20 years. Chapter 15 recorded how Samson was like as a judge. How he was being a judge. Then he used the wolves and then burned down the people's field and vineyards. And then when he started quarreling with people, he killed many of them. And he talked about the tribe of Judah. They betrayed Samson. Then we could see that the tribe of Judah also is self-centered. No matter how Samson was and how the people of Judah treated him, his power, his strength overcome all things. This is how he worked as a judge for 20 years. Nobody followed him. Nobody helped him. He lived in the land of Judah, but eventually the people in Judah betrayed him, sent him to the Philistines. And then he went through a lot of hardship, and he lived inside the cave on the mountain. So that is the place where he lived. And that is the rock of the eagle. Should be very high on the mountain. So from chapter 15, we see about the kung fu of a judge. What has he done? So these are the things recorded. But this is not the biggest thing recorded. Not until we come to chapter 16, the biggest event happened. We believe that God will ultimately save. So there are 3 paragraphs here. Verse 1 to 3. So the one with the strength collapsed or has fallen. Or we look at it from another angle. So the one who received God's strength take over the gate of the enemy. Here, talk about the gate of the enemy. That is to say, his strength overcomes all the enemies. However, this person who overcome all these things has fallen. So this is how we look at verse 1 to 3. Verse 1. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. So there are 3 verbs here in the original text. Samson went. He went to Gaza. This is the first verb. Then he saw a prostitute. And then he went in to spend the night with her. So this is the same root word with chapter 15, verse 1. He said, I'm going to my wife's room. Going is the same word. Chapter 15, verse 1, it says that he took a young goat and went to visit his wife. Then he said, I'm going to my wife's room. That is to say, he would lay with his wife. The original text is enter into her. Now, chapter 16 is the same. He went in to spend the night with her. What is his problem here? When he went to a place, so as a judge, Samson just go back and forth, go up and down, up and down. Now he went to this place. He saw a woman. It's a prostitute. He spent the night with her, lay with her. This is his problem. He just didn't care anything. He did as he saw fit. He just do whatever he wanted. So it's talking to the people in the two generations during the time of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And also, God is speaking to us, speak to this world. What are we pursuing after? Samson himself is just like what we say, like a man who pursue after freedom. Wherever he went, wherever he saw, he would get it. He's a Nazarite. He shouldn't be defiled by the world. Should be fully used by God. However, he didn't care less. He didn't care about God. He didn't care about his parents. Here we see that he left home. He didn't return home. Perhaps he's afraid that if he stayed at home, people will come and kill him, and that would influence his family. But this person, he went after his own desire. Now, Chinese New Year is coming, and the Chinese saying that go after your own heart. Let's not say that. This is the people from the world. But for us who follow God, we are not like that. Verse 2. It talked about Samson getting the gate of the enemy, and people lay in wait for him, wanted to kill him. But when he woke up, it's in verse 3. He got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and tore them loose, bar and all. He tore them all down. He knocked down the gate of Gaza. But so many people laying wait for him, wanting to kill him. But nobody can come near him. It could be that when he woke up, the people came near him, wanted to kill him at the gate. However, he has really powerful kung fu. He saw them. He went to the gate. So he took hold of the bar of the gate, swing it, and then a group of people fell. Nobody dared to come near him. So the whole door frame, the post, the bar, and everything, he knocked them down. So can you imagine how heavy is that gate? He himself alone put them lifted on his shoulders from Gaza to where? Hebron. No, I look at the history. I look at the map in Israel. From this place, Gaza is along the sea. So go all the way to the opposite side, the whole map of Israel. So it's horizontal from east to west. So it's really such a huge land. And Hebron is on the mountaintop. Gezer is by the sea. For one person shouldering the enemy's gate, why? Why? He had to walk such a long way. And he is like a blowing whistle while he's walking. That is to say, he just say, I have taken over the gate of the enemy. No one can do anything to me. He's someone who didn't care anything. As we just said, he didn't care about God or family. He just cared for his own lust and desire. He didn't care about the enemy. He didn't put the enemy in his eyes. There's no one in his eyes. He thinks he's the greatest. He just did as he saw fit. This is Samson. And this is the reason why he died. Verse 4 to 20, the second paragraph. Being subdued by a woman who is without strength. For a person who received God's strength and took over the gate of the enemy, but he collapsed, he fell. He's being subdued by a woman who is without strength. And this is the reason why he died. Verse 4. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. See, the original text, it says there are two sometime later. So eventually, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek. The word love so fell in love here means he wanted to have sexual relations with her. Samson was being lured by the sex of this woman. This is a sexual attraction. So sexual affection. Samson wanted to come near her. This woman is called Delilah. The name means is like without strength, very weak. Like the Chinese saying, like in the Chinese drama said, oh, this woman is about to die from sickness, is without any strength. So it's so weak without strength. So for a person like Samson, full of God's strength, now being subdued by a woman who has fallen sick, it is no strength. Now, Samson could take over the gate of the enemy, but he's being subdued by a woman who is dying of sickness without strength. Of course, Delilah is not sick in this chapter, but his name implies that he's so weak without strength. Now, in verse 5, we could see the rulers of the Philistines went to her and want to give her the money in order to get the secret of Samson's strength, Samson's great strength. So all the way to verse 14, Samson lied to Delilah. Oh, this is so miraculous. So the story says that the 3 times Samson tempted and lied to her. And the 3 times Delilah believed in him, but eventually, of course, not. At least the first 2 times, I should put it this way, they are inside a room, inside a house. Before Samson went there, the people, the Philistine, already lay in wait in the house. Those are the people with strength. They wanted to come and kill Samson. However, when Samson arrived, then he lay with this woman. Right? How can it be? And this woman tied him up. The first time used 7 fresh bowstrings to tie him up. Even for a bull, you tied up the bull will wake up because it is fresh bowstrings. Oh, he didn't care. The second time, the woman tied up Samson with the new ropes, and he didn't care. And the people were lying in wait, but he didn't care. What about Samson? Doesn't he know? Yes or no? It's impossible for this to happen. In fact, Samson, there is no one in his eyes. He didn't care. It doesn't matter. Even if you tied me up or even if you lie in wait for me, it doesn't matter. Even if I have fallen into sleep, so what? He didn't put all these things in his eyes. Oh, the 3rd time, he weaved his hair, the 7 braids of his head. He should have awakened, and he didn't care either. At the end, he was subdued by Delilah. And this is so back in chapter 13 to 14, and this is the point where he could not bear. He could not bear the woman he loved. Every day use her words to force her. And let this man with God's strength, let his heart be subdued. Then he eventually died. This is verse 16. With such naggings, Delilah prodded him day after day until Samson was sick to death of it. So this woman who has no strength, so weak, but every day, day after day, use her words to nag him, to force him. prod him. And eventually she subdued him to a certain extent that even for Samson's heart was being subdued. So that is to say, he nagged every day. He talked every day to him. Or maybe it's not with a loud voice. Could be whipping, wailing, or almost like dying. But this woman continued to nag him over his ears. And his heart is being subdued. So he's being subdued or oppressed. It's being pressed, almost dying unto death. His heart is being suppressed, almost dying. For someone who is so full of strength, but when he faced a woman always nagging him, prodding him, he's about to die. Oh, let's give a big hand to Pastor Ruby, who did a very good translation. Then he said this. Then Delilah knew about the truth. So he asked the Philistines to come, asked the ruler to come who gave him the money. It's a lot of money. So the ruler said, every one of these leaders will give you $1,100. So I believe it's boxes of money being given to her. So all this money, like hundreds, maybe thousands of shekels of silver being brought to Delilah's home. So Samson, before that, lay in bed with a woman. He just didn't care to such an extent. And the Bible recorded, verse 19, then Delilah subdued him, and his strength left him. Eventually, this Samson, who was without strength, subdued and depressed him. Then Samson's strength left him. But for himself, he didn't know anything. He had never done that before. Samson didn't know that the Lord had already left him. It's in the last part of verse 20. Then Samson thought he could freely move around. He looked down all these Philistine leaders. He woke up from his sleep and he wanted to move around. And he didn't realize that God has already left him. Verse 21, then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gezer and set him to grinding grain in the prison. So he had done a lot of hard labor there. Samson, you have a lot of strength. Okay, go and do the grinding. Do the work inside the prison. For a judge with God's strength, he lost his eyes. He lost his strength. Now working hard labor or being tortured. Is that his end? No. God has his will. God eventually, ultimately will save. Chapter 16. Verse 23. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate. So they brought Samson to perform for them. And he said to this young boy, "Oh, I am really having a lot of hardship. I want to come close to a pillar." Verse 26, show me where are the two pillars supporting the whole temple. Lead me there. He was blind. And this young boy brought him to, to the pillars supporting this temple. And the house there, the temple there, was filled with men and women. And even on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. So on the top, 3,000 people, and maybe on the ground floor, 5,000 at least. Verse 28, then Samson prayed to the Lord. So it's 2 times he said, pray to the Lord. He prayed by God. This is his second prayer to God. And this time he seriously prayed to God. O sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me. This time, give me once more. Give me a chance once more. I believe that Samson, who was blind, reflected on himself. He knew that he is against the covenant as a Nazarite. The Lord has eventually left him. But when his hair revived again, restored again, he knew that God was there. When he came out, he already prepared himself to die with the enemy. Then he prayed again. Oh God, give me strength once more, only this time. And this prayer is very selfish because he wanted to revenge. Or to revenge against the Philistines for his gouging his eyes. Then he embraced these 2 pillars and the whole temple collapsed. He said, I would die with the Philistines. So he used all his strength to reach towards the 2 central pillars. So from chapter 13 until this chapter, he never said he used all his effort. He tried his very best. Then the temple collapsed. Samson died. And many people died. The second part of verse 30, thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. From verse 23 until 31 is the last paragraph. It's God's salvation while he died with the Philistines. He's being tortured by the Philistines. He died with the enemy. God gave him strength again. Thus, Samson killed many more when he died than while he lived. So we cannot calculate the numbers. Just now, I roughly calculated it's almost 8,000 men and women died. It could be more. What is God trying to tell us? Let's go back to chapter 13, verse 5. When Samson was given birth, God said to his mother, verse 5 in chapter 13, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. He will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. He was a Nazarite, and his head cannot be shaved. When he did it according to God's command, he could save the Israelites. But here, he didn't say to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines. He will begin. Now, when we come to chapter 16 today, at that time, he saved the Israelites from the hands of the Philistines because many of them died. But this beginning is also his ending. This beginning and his ending is God's miraculous salvation. The reason why the Bible recorded this way is the last verse in chapter 16. He was buried in his father's tomb. And also his father's whole family went down to get his body. At that time, the Philistines is already broken. Like the Philistines, they already collapsed. That's why Samson's father, the whole family can go down. The Philistines, they do not have the strength to revenge. That's how Samson's father, the whole house, went down to get the dead body and buried him in the father's tomb. We could see that the Philistines being subdued and believe that God ultimately saved them. God's heart being accomplished. Eventually, the Israelites can come out from the hands of the Philistines. They are delivered. However, this judge, Samson, died. His beginning becomes his ending. So at that time, he actually saved Israel. That's the beginning. So how do we look at the two kings, Jeroboam and Rehoboam? For someone who has great strength, like Jeroboam, and for Rehoboam, who was a really cruel king without wisdom, which king do you choose? Both of them, they have a lot of problems. In the time of Judges, every judge has a lot of problems. And also recorded one thing. From Othniel all the way to Samson, every judge, they are worse than another. Every generation, one generation is worse than another. Who can be like Samson, didn't care less. In which generation, it's like the tribe of Judah, who bind up their own judge because of their own benefit. In fact, this king is for his personal gain. Like Jeroboam had made a lot of idols. For Rehoboam, is the cruel king without any wisdom. Is like a violent king. We should not choose either one. The Israelites should not choose either Jeroboam or Rehoboam. Every one of them has problems. Just like judges, every generation they have problems. And also the Israelites in the time of Judges, they have a lot of problems. So in all their generations, they just did as they saw fit. Whatever they liked, they did it. And Samson is the lowest person. So first, this is the first point. In fact, we should choose God. We shouldn't choose neither Jeroboam or Rehoboam. Why we have to choose God? We believe that God will ultimately save. In the time of the two generations, we look at the time of judges. Every judge is full of weakness. But God will surely ultimately save the people, no matter how weak they are. The will of God will be accomplished. This is our faith in God. When we look at Samson, it's not look at how powerful he is. When we look at Samson, we have to see the love and the power of God. He will surely accomplish his will. God saved the Israelites. In the time of the two kings, God wanted them to follow God. And nowadays, God also wanted us be cautious, be aware of this self-centeredness. We have to follow God alone. We have to choose God. Oh, do not be just careless. God will surely be accomplished. We believe in God. God will give us peace. God look after us, watch over us. God is with us. To us nowadays, what are we to minister today when leading the church? I don't look at this world. I won't believe in what the world is reporting on the appearance. I just believe in God. I walk in the truth. It doesn't matter how the people say anything or what color they belong to. I stand by the truth. Believe that God will ultimately save. God reigns. Amen. May God use the book of Judges up to chapter 16 becomes great help to many people. For next week, we will talk about even more darkness, greater darkness. There is no judge at all. It's never easy and miserable for them. But God still works. We will see each other next week.